I'm Lucy, 32 female. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb with my husband, Alex, in a house we designed together, me handling the architecture, him ensuring it was structurally sound. It was our sanctuary, a testament to our partnership. But a slow, creeping poison had seeped into our foundation, and its source was Alex's younger sister, Sophie. This is the story of how I nearly lost everything to her subtle, venomous lies, and how a forgotten baby monitor became the instrument of my salvation and her undoing. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our life on the surface was perfect. Alex and I had been married for 5 years, a couple that our friends often referred to as the blueprint. He was a civil engineer, a man of logic and precision, who saw the world in straight lines and solid structures. I was an architectural drafter, someone who dreamed in angles and aesthetics, bringing form to his function. We complemented each other, or so I believed. We had our home, our careers, and a deep, seemingly unshakable love. The only variable I hadn't accounted for was Sophie. Sophie was Alex's younger sister by 7 years, a whirlwind of pastel-colored athleisure wear and pseudo-spiritual wellness advice. She was a lifestyle blogger, a career that seemed to involve taking perfectly staged photos of avocado toast and captioning them with inspirational quotes she'd lifted from the internet. She was beautiful, effervescent, and deeply adored by her family, especially her mother, Eleanor, a retired real estate mogul who saw Sophie as a fragile, creative soul in a harsh world. To everyone else, Sophie was charming. To me, she was a puzzle I could never quite solve. Her compliments always felt double-edged, her hugs a fraction too tight, her concern laced with something cloying and insincere. The first crack in our foundation appeared so subtly I almost missed it. It was during a family dinner at Eleanor's house, a sprawling, modern monstrosity that felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. We were celebrating Alex's promotion. I had spent the afternoon baking his favorite dessert, a complicated lemon meringue pie that required precise timing and a steady hand. When I brought it to the table, the family praised it. Alex beamed, kissing my temple. "Lucy's a magician in the kitchen," he said proudly. Sophie smiled sweetly from across the table. "It looks divine, Lucy. You're so talented. It must be nice having the time for such elaborate hobbies." The comment hung in the air, seemingly innocent, but I felt the sting. I worked a demanding full-time job, often staying late to meet deadlines. My hobbies were squeezed into the precious few hours I had to myself. It was a subtle dig, implying I was a leisurely housewife while she was a busy, modern career woman. Alex didn't notice. He just nodded in agreement. "She's the best." Later that week, Alex came home from work looking troubled. "Hey," he said, bypassing our usual greeting kiss and heading straight for the fridge. "Mom called. She's a bit worried about you." I frowned, putting down the blueprints I was reviewing. "Worried? About what?" You know how she is. Sophie mentioned you seemed a little stressed at dinner the other night. Said you were very quiet. She's just hoping everything is okay with your project at work." I was taken aback. I hadn't been quiet. I had been actively engaged in conversations all evening. I'd talked at length with Alex's father about a new bridge project and debated politics with his uncle. "I was fine, Alex. A little tired, maybe. My project is demanding, but it's going well." I know," he said, holding up a hand. "I told them you were fine, but Sophie was just concerned. She said you looked pale and that maybe you were pushing yourself too hard. She worries about you, Luce. She thinks of you as the sister she never had." The phrase felt like a lie in my mouth. I forced a smile. "That's sweet of her, but I'm fine, really." But the seed was planted. A week later, a similar incident occurred. Alex and I had planned a weekend getaway, a rare chance to escape our busy schedules. We'd booked a small cabin in the mountains. The day before we were set to leave, Sophie called Alex. I was in the other room but could hear his side of the conversation. It was a series of placating, ahas, and I understands. When he hung up, he had a heavy sigh. "What's wrong?" I asked. That was Sophie. Her car broke down. She was supposed to go to a wellness retreat this weekend, and she's really upset. She asked if I could help her sort it out tomorrow. Tomorrow, Alex, we're leaving at 8 a.m. I know, but she was really distraught. She said she wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. It's her big annual retreat. I felt a FL. Ash of irritation. Sophie's life was a constant stream of self-manufactured emergencies. Can't she get a rental or call a tow truck? Alex's expression hardened slightly. Lucy, she's my sister. She's upset and she asked for my help. I can't just tell her to call a stranger. We can leave a few hours later. It's not a big deal. It was a big deal. That time was ours, carved out and protected, but I could see the wall going up in his eyes. He was already defensive, positioned as the good brother against his supposedly unfeeling wife. I relented, swallowing my disappointment. Okay, of course, just try to be quick. We ended up leaving 5 hours late. Alex spent the morning on the phone with mechanics and rental agencies for Sophie, whose car, it turned out, just had a dead battery. The entire drive to the cabin was tense. The weekend, meant to be a reprieve, was tainted by the long shadow of his sister's needs. When I tried to talk to him about it gently on the second night, he shut me down. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, his tone sharp. "I helped my sister. That's what family does. Sophie said you'd probably be annoyed, and I told her she was wrong. I guess I shouldn't have." My stomach dropped. Sophie said you'd probably be annoyed. She had preemptively framed my reaction, painting me as the villain before I'd even had a chance to speak. It was brilliant, in a sickening way. I was left speechless, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The man sitting across from me, the man who had always been my staunchest defender, was now looking at me through a lens that his sister had carefully crafted. The cracks were no longer hairline fractures. They were becoming fissures, and I was terrified of how deep they might go. The incidents began to pile up, each one a small, almost insignificant thing on its own, but together they formed a suffocating pattern. Sophie's influence over Alex grew, not through overt demands, but through a steady drip of carefully worded concerns and fabricated stories that slowly eroded his perception of me. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and I was the unwitting subject. One of the most insidious tactics was her manipulation of our finances. Alex and I had always been transparent about money. We had a joint account for household expenses and our own separate accounts for personal spending. It was a system built on trust. That trust began to fray after a conversation Alex had with Sophie. He approached me one evening, looking uncomfortable. "Luce, can we talk about the credit card bill?" "Sure," I said, looking up from my laptop. "Is there a problem?" "No, not a problem exactly," he hedged. "It's just, Sophie and I were talking about financial planning, and she mentioned this app she uses to track every little expense. She was showing me how much little purchases can add up, like all those coffees and lunches out." I knew where this was going. I occasionally bought coffee on my way to work, and sometimes grabbed lunch with my best friend, Maya, if we were both having a hectic day. These were small-ticket items from my personal account, well within my budget. "And?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Well, Sophie was just saying, from an outsider's perspective, she was a little surprised by some of your spending habits. She said she worries we're not saving aggressively enough for the future, for kids and everything. She said she would never spend that much on frivolous things. The word frivolous landed like a slap. My coffee was a $5 treat. My lunch with Maya was a moment of sanity in a stressful work week. Sophie, meanwhile, regularly dropped hundreds of dollars on wellness, products, crystal-infused water bottles, and designer yoga pants. "My spending is from my own account, Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It doesn't affect our joint savings goals. We're well ahead of the schedule we set for ourselves." I know," he said quickly, already backpedaling. But she was just pointing it out from a place of love. She sees how hard I work, and she wants to make sure we're both on the same page. She even said she feels bad for you, that you might be spending because you're feeling unfulfilled at work. The audacity of it took my breath away. She had twisted my small personal joys into a narrative of reckless spending and professional dissatisfaction. She had framed it as concern, as love, while simultaneously painting me as irresponsible and secretly unhappy. It was a lie wrapped in a layer of feigned sympathy, designed to make Alex see me as a problem that needed solving. When I tried to defend myself, to explain the blatant hypocrisy of Sophie, the queen of consumerism, critiquing my occasional latte, Alex grew defensive. "She's just trying to help, Lucy. Why do you always have to be so sensitive when it comes to my sister? She adores you. She told me the other day she wishes she had you." Our talent and drive. It was a perfect loop. Any criticism I had of Sophie was twisted into me being sensitive or ungrateful. Any evidence I presented was countered with a saccharine compliment she had supposedly paid me in private. I was being slowly and systematically isolated, my credibility chipped away piece by piece. My own husband was becoming an unwilling accomplice in his sister's campaign. The gaslighting extended beyond finances. She started to meddle with our social life. If I had a girls' night out with Maya, Sophie would later tell Alex that she'd heard from a friend that I'd had a few too many and was acting flirtatious. The story was always vague, the source untraceable, but the damage was done. Alex wouldn't accuse me directly, but there would be a coolness in his eyes, a new distance between us. He'd ask questions like, "So, who all was at the bar?" with a casualness that felt utterly staged. She would accidentally let things slip. "Oh, Lucy, did you remember to call Alex's aunt for her birthday?" she'd ask in front of him, knowing full well I had already done it. When I'd say yes, she'd feign relief. "Oh, thank goodness. I was just worried because you seemed so forgetful lately. Alex mentioned you misplaced your keys twice last week. I just don't want him to worry." Suddenly, I wasn't just sensitive and financially irresponsible. I was also becoming forgetful and unreliable. Every minor human error was collected, cataloged, and presented to my husband as evidence of my decline. The worst part was how subtle it all was. On the surface, Sophie was the picture of a loving, concerned sister-in-law. Her manipulations were so skillfully woven into the fabric of everyday conversation that calling them out made me seem paranoid and unstable. Exactly the image she was trying to create. I started to doubt myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I overreacting? I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly questioning my own perceptions. Alex, the man who was supposed to be my anchor, was now the one creating the waves. He wasn't malicious, he was being manipulated. He genuinely believed his sister had his best interests at heart. He couldn't see the poison she was injecting into our marriage, one sweet, smiling lie at a time. I was spiraling into despair, trapped in a soundproof room where I was screaming, but no one could hear me. The foundation of our life wasn't just cracked anymore, it was beginning to crumble. The breaking point, the moment the fog of gaslighting finally began to clear, came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, accidental revelation. It was delivered through the speaker of a baby monitor, a piece of technology we had bought months ago in hopeful anticipation of a future we were planning together. We didn't have a baby yet, but we had set up the nursery, and the monitor was a gift from my parents. It sat on the dresser, a silent, unassuming witness. The preceding weeks had been hell. Sophie's campaign had escalated. She had convinced Alex that I was becoming increasingly withdrawn and emotionally volatile. My very real distress, caused by her own actions, was being used as further proof of my instability. I was crying more often, feeling helpless and exhausted. Alex, caught in the middle, interpreted my pain not as a symptom of the problem, but as the problem itself. He suggested therapy for me, not for us. He said it was because he loved me and was worried, but his words felt like they had been scripted by Sophie. That particular Saturday, Alex had gone out for the day with some old college friends, a trip Sophie had conveniently encouraged, telling him he needed a break from the stress at home. I was left alone, wandering through the quiet rooms of the house we'd built, feeling like a ghost. Sophie was scheduled to come over later in the afternoon. She had a flimsy excuse, something about borrowing a serving platter for a dinner party she was hosting, but I knew it was a reconnaissance mission. She wanted to check in, to see the effects of her handiwork, and to gather more material to report back to Alex. Her mother, Elinor, was with her. They arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and faux sympathy. "Lucy, darling," Elinor said, clutching my arm. "Sophie told me you've been having a hard time. You know we're all here for you." I forced a smile and made tea, my hands trembling slightly. I endured their cloying questions and barely veiled pity for about an hour. They sat on my couch, in my living room, dissecting my life under the guise of concern. Finally, Sophie announced she had to make an important call. "Would you mind if I took it in the nursery?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "The reception is always so much better in the back of the house, and I don't want to disturb you and Mom." The nursery was my sanctuary, the one room that still felt full of hope. The thought of her in there, pacing among the soft yellows and rays we had chosen, made my skin crawl, but I couldn't refuse without seeming hostile and confirming her narrative. "Of course," I said, my voice tight. "Go ahead." She disappeared down the hall. I sat with Elinor, making strained small talk, my mind racing. About 10 minutes later, I remembered that I had left the receiver for the baby monitor on the kitchen counter, next to the tea kettle. I had been testing it the day before, checking the range. I hadn't even realized I'd left it on. As I walked into the kitchen to get more hot water, I heard voices coming from the small speaker. At first, it was just a faint crackle. Then, I heard Sophie's voice, clear as day. But this wasn't the gentle, concerned tone she used with me. This was sharp, triumphant, and dripping with contempt. She was on the phone with her mother, who must have stepped out of the living room. "Can't believe how easy it is, Mom," Sophie was saying, followed by a short, cruel laugh. "He just laps it up. I told him Lucy was probably spending so much money because she felt empty inside. He looked so worried. He's completely under my thumb." I froze, my hand hovering over the kettle. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. This couldn't be real. Elinor's voice, lower and conspiratorial, came through the speaker. "You have to be careful, Sophie. Don't get cocky. Alex loves her." "Loves her?" Sophie scoffed. The sound was ugly. "He loves the idea of her, the perfect, stable wife, but I've shown him the cracks. All I have to do is whisper and he starts seeing them everywhere. Last week I told him she seemed off, like she was hiding something. Now he's questioning every time she gets a text message. He's so predictable. He wants to be the hero, the one who fixes things, and I'm just showing him how broken his perfect little wife is." The air left my lungs. It wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't me being too sensitive. It was real. Every suspicion, every gut feeling I'd had for the past year coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign. Elinor sighed. "I still don't see why this is necessary. They seemed happy." "Happy?" Sophie's voice rose, laced with a venom I had never heard before. "She doesn't deserve him, Mom. She's boring. She's a glorified draftsman who thinks she's some kind of artist. Alex is meant for more. He could have married into a family with real influence, real connections. Not her. She's holding him back. Once he finally sees her for the unstable, needy mess she is, he'll be free. He'll thank me for it one day." The receiver slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the counter. The sound was loud in the silent kitchen, but they couldn't hear it. They were too absorbed in their conspiracy. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The despair that had been my constant companion for months evaporated, replaced by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. The tears that sprang to my eyes weren't tears of sadness, but of rage. I had been mourning a marriage I thought was failing because of my own shortcomings, but it wasn't failing. It was being sabotaged. I picked up the receiver and, with a steady hand, pressed the record button on my phone, holding it close to the speaker. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The game had changed. Sophie thought she was playing with a broken doll, but she had just awakened a sleeping giant. The voice from the nursery wasn't just a confession, it was a declaration of war, and I was finally ready to fight back. The recording was my anchor in a sea of chaos. For the next hour after Sophie and Alina left, I sat at my kitchen table and listened to it again and again. Each venomous word, each casual, cruel laugh was a nail in the coffin of the woman I used to be, the woman who doubted herself, who apologized for her feelings, who tried to make herself smaller to keep the peace. That woman was gone. In her place was an architect of a different kind, one who was about to draw up the plans for a meticulous demolition. My first instinct was raw, unadulterated fury. I wanted to send the recording to Alex immediately. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to force him to see the truth. But I held back. The recording was damning, but Sophie had spent months conditioning him to see me as unstable. If I came at him in a blaze of rage, brandishing a secret recording, it would be all too easy for her to twist it. She would claim I was paranoid, that I was setting her up, that I was hearing things that weren't there. She would cry, and Alex, conditioned to be her protector, would rush to her side. No, a frontal assault was not the answer. This required strategy. This required evidence, irrefutable, interlocking pieces of a puzzle that would leave no room for doubt. My best friend, Maya, was my first call. When she arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and a detect, Aramind look on her face, I played her the recording. She listened in stony silence, her knuckles white as she gripped her wine glass. When it finished, she let out a long, slow breath. "That witch," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger on my behalf. "Lucy, I am so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this calculated." "I need a plan, Maya," I said, my own voice steady now. "A real plan. I need to prove everything. Not just what she said on the recording, but all the little lies that led up to it. I need to connect the dots so clearly that Alex has no choice but to see the full picture." And so we began. For the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. Maya, a graphic designer with a knack for organization, helped me create a timeline, a digital corkboard of cruelty. We started with the recording as our central piece of evidence and worked backward, dissecting every incident from the past year. First, we tackled the finances. Sophie had accused me of being a reckless spender. I went through my bank statements and credit card bills with a fine-tooth comb. I created a spreadsheet, color-coding every single purchase she could have possibly twisted. My frivolous daily coffees, they amounted to less than $100 a month. My lunches with Maya, twice a month at most. I then did some light, discreet digging into Sophie's life. As a lifestyle blogger, her life was an open book. I scrolled through months of her social media posts. There she was, holding up a $500 handbag she'd bought for a sponsored post that never materialized. There she was on a spontaneous weekend trip to a luxury spa. I took screenshots of it all, the designer clothes, the expensive brunches, the boutique fitness classes. I cross-referenced the dates of her posts with her comments to Alex about my own spending. The hypocrisy was staggering. On the very same day she'd expressed concern over my $5 latte, she had posted a photo of a $200 facial she'd treated herself to because she deserved it. Next, we moved on to the social lies, the accusations of me being flirtatious or drinking too much. I thought back to the specific nights she had targeted. I texted the friends I had been with on those occasions. "Hey, weird question," I wrote. "Remember that night we went to the Roxy? Did I seem drunk to you, or was I flirting with anyone?" The responses were immediate and confused. "Drunk? No, you had 2 glasses of wine all night." "Flirting? Lucy, you spent the entire night telling us about the new sustainable housing project you're working on. You were practically giving a lecture." I saved every single text message, screenshotting the conversations and adding them to our evidence file. We unraveled the lie about my forgetfulness. Sophie had claimed Alex was worried because I had misplaced my keys. I remembered that week. I had been working on a massive deadline, pulling 12-hour days. I called my boss. "Richard," I said, "do you remember the week we were finalizing the blueprints for the Henderson building? I just need to confirm the dates for my records." He confirmed the dates, and I found the email I had sent to Alex that week, explaining that I would be exhausted and a bit scattered due to the workload. He had replied, "I understand, honey. Don't worry, we'll celebrate when it's over." He hadn't been worried about my memory, he had been supportive. Sophie had taken a normal, stress-induced moment and reframed it as a sign of mental decline. The most damning piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. I remembered Sophie mentioning a friend of a friend who had supposedly witnessed my bad behavior. On a hunch, I scrolled through her followers on social media. I found a woman named Tiffany who was tagged in several photos with Sophie and who worked at the same marketing firm as one of Maya's friends. Maya made a call. An hour later, she called me back, her voice low and furious. Tiffany, after some prodding, had admitted that Sophie had paid her. Not with money, but with free promotion on her blog. In exchange, Tiffany had agreed to be Sophie's anonymous source to confirm stories if anyone ever asked. Sophie hadn't just been lying, she had been building a network of accomplices. Each piece of evidence was a revelation, a moment of painful clarity. It was like watching a building being deconstructed in reverse. I could see how she had laid the foundation of doubt, erected the walls of lies, and decorated the rooms with feigned concern. My life over the past year had been a carefully designed illusion, and I was finally seeing the raw, ugly structure beneath it. The sadness and confusion were replaced by a hard, cold resolve. I wasn't just gathering evidence to save my marriage anymore. I was gathering it to reclaim my sanity and expose a manipulator for who she truly was. The blueprint for her undoing was nearly complete. With a mountain of evidence compiled, He question was no longer if I would act, but how. Showing it all to Alex privately still felt risky. He was so enmeshed in her web that he might see it as an attack, a meticulously prepared prosecution of the sister he adored. A private confrontation would give Sophie the chance to wriggle free, to cry, to play the victim, to twist the narrative one last time. I couldn't allow that. The exposure had to be public, undeniable, and executed with the precision of a controlled demolition. There could be no ambiguity, no escape route. The perfect opportunity presented itself in an email from my mother-in-law, Elinor. It was an invitation to a family dinner. The occasion? To celebrate Sophie. She had just been nominated for some meaningless Lifestyle Blogger of the Year award, an online poll she had relentlessly promoted for weeks. It was perfect. The entire family would be there, Elinor and her husband, various aunts and uncles, and of course the guests of honor, Alex and Sophie. It would be a stage of her own making, and I would be the one to burn it to the ground. Maya and I spent the next week drafting the counter blueprint. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be a presentation. I was an architectural drafter, and I would approach this with the same methodical calm I used for my job. Every line would be precise, every angle calculated. The centerpiece of the plan was a slideshow. It sounded clinical, almost corporate, but that was the point. I wanted to strip all the emotion out of it and present cold, hard facts. Maya, with her graphic design skills, helped me create a presentation that was clean, professional, and devastatingly effective. We divided it into sections, each one titled with one of Sophie's own phrases. The first section was titled, "From a Place of Love, an Analysis of Financial Concern." It began with a slide quoting Sophie's claim that I was a frivolous spender. The following slides were a side-by-side comparison. On the left, my bank statements showing my modest personal spending. On the right, screenshots of Sophie's social media posts showcasing her extravagant purchases dated to the exact same weeks she had been criticizing me. We even included a pie chart showing that her monthly spending on non-essentials was, conservatively, 10 times my own. The second section was just a little forgetful, a timeline of fabricated events. This section detailed her claims about my unreliability. We had a slide with the email from my boss confirming my intense work week, juxtaposed with the text message from Alex showing his initial support. Then, we laid out the other instances, each one followed by screenshots of texts from my friends, flatly debunking her lies about my behavior on our nights out. We included a slide dedicated to her friend of a friend, Tiffany, with a brief, anonymous summary of how she had been coerced into spreading rumors. The final section was the most powerful. We titled it, "The Voice from the Nursery." I had an audio engineer friend of Maya's clean up the recording from the baby monitor, isolating the voices and removing any background static. It was crisp, clear, and undeniable. We embedded the audio file into the final slide, ready to be played. With the presentation complete, I rehearsed my part. I knew I couldn't let my anger take over. I had to be calm, factual, and unwavering. I practiced my opening lines in front of the mirror, forcing my voice to remain steady, my hands to remain still. I was not the hysterical, emotional woman Sophie had painted me to be. I was a professional presenting her findings. The day of the dinner party, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Alex was still distant, treating me with a gentle, cautious fragility that grated on my nerves. He thought he was being kind to his struggling wife, unaware that he was talking to a woman who was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of his family. He straightened his tie in the mirror. "You ready to go, Luce? Try to have a good time tonight, for Sophie's sake." "I'll do my best," I said, my voice betraying nothing. I had arranged one final detail. I had a small, discreet projector in my bag, one I'd borrowed from work, along with a portable speaker. The dining room at Aliner's house had a large, blank white wall that was perfect for presentations during her real estate days. It would serve my purpose just as well. As we drove to his parents' house, Alex reached over and took my hand. "I know things have been tough lately," he said, his voice soft. "But we'll get through it. I love you." I looked at his hand on mine. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sadness. I was about to shatter his world, to force him to see a truth about his sister that would change his perception of his family forever. But it was a necessary pain. The foundation of our marriage was rotten, poisoned by lies. The only way to save it was to strip it down to the studs and see what was left. "I love you too," I replied, and it was the truth. I loved the man he was, and I was holding onto the hope that he was still in there somewhere, buried beneath his sister's suffocating influence. Tonight, I would find out. The counter blueprint was finalized. It was time for the demolition. The atmosphere at Aliner's house was thick with self-congratulation. Sophie was the star of the show, flitting around the room in a ridiculously expensive dress, accepting praise for her hard work and authenticity as a blogger. She greeted me with a hug that felt like a snake coiling around me. "Lucy, I'm so glad you came," she whispered, her voice oozing fake sincerity. "I know things have been tough. Your being here means the world to me." Alex beamed at her, the proud older brother. He was completely oblivious, which made what I was about to do feel both terrible and absolutely necessary. I gave him a small, reassuring smile and took my seat at the long, formal dining table. I positioned myself at the head of the table, opposite my father-in-law, giving me a clear, unobstructed view of the blank wall I had chosen as my screen. We made it through the appetizers and the main course. The conversation was a nauseating tribute to Sophie's achievements. I listened quietly, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. I ate my food, complimented Aliner on the roast, and played the part of the supportive sister-in-law. Sophie was in her element, lapping up the attention, occasionally shooting me a look of what she probably thought was sympathy. Finally, the moment came. As the dessert plates were being cleared, Aliner stood up, tapping her glass for a toast. "I just want to say again how incredibly proud we are of our Sophie," she began. This was my cue. Before she could continue, I stood up as well. "Actually, Aliner," I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the room, "if you don't mind, I've also prepared something to celebrate Sophie. It won't take long." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Alex looked at me, confused. Sophie's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. From my bag, I took out the small projector and speaker and placed them on the table. With practiced efficiency, I connected my phone. A bright, clear image appeared on the wall. It was the title slide, a tribute to Sophie. As you all know, Sophie has built her career on a foundation of honesty and transparency. I began, my voice even and professional, as if I were presenting a project at work. So I thought it would be fitting to honor her nomination by taking a closer look at the values she espouses. Let's start with one of her favorites, fiscal responsibility. I clicked to the next slide. The title appeared, From a Place of Love, an Analysis of Financial Concern. There, on the wall for the entire family to see, was the side-by-side comparison of my spending versus hers. I calmly walked them through the data, my voice never wavering. As you can see, during the same period Sophie was expressing concern to Alex about my so-called frivolous spending of approximately $87 a month on coffee and lunches. Her own documented non-essential spending exceeded $1,200. A stunned silence fell over the room. Sophie's face had gone pale. Alex was staring at the wall, his brow furrowed in disbelief. I clicked to the next section. Just a little forgetful, a timeline of fabricated events. One by one, I dismantled her lies. I showed the emails, the text messages from my friends, the clear evidence of her manipulation. I explained how she had taken my stress and reframed it as instability, my social life, and painted it as infidelity. With each slide, the tension in the room grew thicker. I could feel Alex's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on the presentation, on the facts. When I got to the slide about her paid informant, Sophie finally broke. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice high and shrill. "She's making this all up. Lucy is unstable, Alex, I told you." "Did you?" I asked calmly, turning to face her for the first time. "Did you tell him you were worried about me, or did you have another word for it?" I clicked to the final slide. The title was stark, The Voice from the Nursery. "I think you called it showing him how broken his perfect little wife is," I said, my eyes locked on hers. And then I pressed play. Sophie's voice filled the silent room, amplified by the speaker. It was the recording from the baby monitor. Her sharp, contemptuous words, her cruel laugh, her plotting with her mother. Every ugly syllable echoed off the pristine white walls of Aliner's dining room. "Can't believe how easy it is, Mom. He just laps it up. I told him Lucy was probably spending so much money because she felt empty inside. He's completely under my thumb." Aliner looked like she had turned to stone, her face a mask of horror and guilt. The rest of E family stared, mouths agape. Sophie was shaking, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Alex, her face crumpling into tears. "Alex, she's twisting my words. I was venting. It didn't mean anything." But her voice was drowned out by her own recorded words, continuing their damning indictment. "She doesn't deserve him, Mom. She's holding him back. Once he finally sees her for the unstable, needy mess she is, he'll be free. He'll thank me for it one day." When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. I turned off the projector, and the room was plunged back into the soft dinner party lighting. I finally looked at Alex. His face was ashen. The confusion and disbelief had been replaced by a look of profound, sickening realization. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his sister, but it was as if he was seeing her for the first time. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. His words were quiet, almost a whisper, but they carried more weight than any shout ever could. "Get out," he said to Sophie. "Alex, please," she sobbed. "Get out of this house," he repeated, his voice cracking with a pain so deep it was almost physical. He then turned his gaze to his mother. "And you knew, you listened to it, and you did nothing." He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a universe of regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't need them. I picked up my bag. "I'll be staying with Maya tonight," I said to him softly. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of my husband's family behind me. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to see what, if anything, was worth rebuilding from the rubble. The night I left Aliner's house, I didn't know if my marriage was over. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the home we had built together, not yet. It felt tainted by the lies that had been allowed to fester within its walls. Maya's apartment became my sanctuary, a quiet place where I could breathe for the first time in months. I slept for 10 straight hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, and woke up feeling lighter than I had in a year. The weight of the gaslighting, the constant self-doubt, was gone. Alex called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later, and again. He sent a barrage of texts. "Lucy, please, we need to talk. I am so sorry. I was a fool. I love you, please just tell me where you are." I knew I had to talk to him eventually, but I needed time. I needed to let the dust settle, not just for him, but for me. I needed to decide what I wanted my future to look like, with or without him. For 2 days, I focused on myself. I took long walks, ate good food, and talked for hours with Maya, not just about the drama, but about my career, my dreams, the person I was outside of my marriage. It was a rediscovery of self. On the third day, I agreed to meet Alex. We met on neutral ground, a small park halfway between Maya's apartment and our house. When I saw him, my heart ached. He looked terrible. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept since the dinner party. He didn't try to make excuses. He didn't try to defend his sister or his mother. He just sat on the park bench, looked me in the eye, and apologized. "I have no words to tell you how sorry I am, Lucy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I let her poison my mind. I let her poison our marriage. I stopped listening to you, and I started listening to her whispers. I failed you as a husband, as a partner, and as a friend. There is no excuse for my blindness." He told me what had happened after I left. Sophie and Alina were gone from his life. He had told them that until they could offer me a genuine, heartfelt apology, and even then, it might not be enough. He wanted nothing to do with them. He had chosen me, unequivocally. But it wasn't that simple. "I'm glad you see the truth, Alex," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened. You didn't trust me. You chose to believe the worst about me over and over again. How do we rebuild a foundation when the bedrock of trust is gone?" It was a long, hard conversation. We talked for hours, laying everything bare. I told him how lonely and insane I had felt, how his doubt had hurt me more than Sophie's lies ever could. He listened, and for the first time in a long time, he truly heard me. He didn't get defensive. He just nodded, his eyes filled with tears. We decided to try again, but not by simply going back to the way things were. We started marriage counseling that week. Our therapist was a no-nonsense woman who helped us unpack the damage and draw up a new blueprint for our relationship. Alex had to learn to set firm boundaries with his family and to recognize the signs of manipulation. I had to learn to trust him again, to believe he would be my defender, my partner in all things. It was a slow, arduous process. There were days when my anger would resurface and days when his guilt was overwhelming. But we kept showing up for the therapy sessions and for each other. We were rebuilding, brick by painful brick. As for Sophie, her life imploded. News of the dinner party demolitions spread through the family like wildfire. Her carefully curated image was shattered. Her blog, once a monument to her perfect life, became a ghost town. She lost sponsorships and her follower count plummeted. She had built her identity on a lie, and when that lie was exposed, there was nothing left. The last I heard, she had moved to a different city to start over. Alina sent me a long, rambling letter full of justifications and self-pity. It wasn't an apology, and I didn't bother to respond. The relationship with Alex's family is permanently fractured. We see his father and his other relatives on holidays, but it is strained and awkward. Sophie and Alina are never there. That is a boundary Alex has enforced without fail. Today, 2 years later, our new foundation feels stronger than the old one ever was. It's not perfect, but it's real. It's built on radical honesty and a hard-won understanding of what it truly means to be partners. The nursery is no longer a room of just hope, it's a room of reality. Our daughter, Lily, is 6 months old, and she has a laugh that can fill the whole house. Sometimes, when I'm rocking her to sleep at night, I look at the baby monitor on her dresser. It's a newer model, a replacement for the one that now sits in a box in the attic. It's a quiet reminder of how close I came to losing everything, but also a symbol of how the truth, even when it's just a whisper, can be powerful enough to bring down an empire of lies. My old life was demolished, but the life I have now, the one I drafted myself, is more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined.